Welcome to Moonlit Romantic, a quiet place for soothing bedtime love stories. Tonight's story is titled Holiday Heartbreak. When Olivia Parker returns to her small hometown of Maple Ridge just before Christmas, she carries the weight of a sudden breakup and the ache of promises left unfinished. Determined not to let sorrow dim the season, she throws herself into helping with the town's holiday festival, only to discover that the boy she once loved, Matthew Cole, has also returned. As snow falls, ribbons are tied, and old wounds begin to soften, Olivia must decide whether this holiday will be remembered only for loss or for the quiet beginnings of something new. So settle in, let the day fall away, and allow this gentle winter tale to guide you toward rest. Chapter 1. Homecoming in Blue. Olivia Parker pressed her forehead to the bus window and watched snow stitch the fields into a single soft quilt. December had arrived with its familiar hush, but this year the quiet felt heavy instead of holy. She curled her fingers around a paper cup of peppermint cocoa that had cooled to a memory and tried not to reread the message that had unspooled her winter. I am sorry. This is not working. I need space. Sent in one blue bubble between meetings, like returning a borrowed sweater. She had stared at those sparse sentences for a long minute in her city apartment, where the twinkle lights she'd strung across the window suddenly looked foolish, as if she had decorated for a party that no longer existed. There had been no conversation, no gentle unwinding of shared plans, just a door closing without a hand, even on the knob. Now the bus sighed into Maple Ridge, her small hometown, tucked between evergreens and a river that wore ice like lace. The station had been painted a cheerful red since she'd last been home. A wreath hung crookedly above the door, generous with pine cones. Olivia collected her small suitcase and pulled her scarf up over a face that did not want to betray its ache. Home smelled exactly as she remembered: cold air and wood smoke, the sugar bloom of cinnamon that always escaped the bakery at the corner, the faint metallic promise of snow. On Main Street, shop windows glowed. The bookstore had built a pyramid of romances and mysteries tied with velvet ribbon. The hardware store had coaxed their display of snow shovels into something almost festive with plaid bows. Across the square, the enormous spruce that served as the town tree waited, unlit, dark branches laden, as if listening for the first chord of a favorite song. Olivia's mother met her on the front porch of the old white house with the blue shutters, the same house where Olivia had learned to braid ribbon and handle disappointment with grace. They held each other a heartbeat longer than usual. Then her mother pulled back and gave that keen, loving look that could unwrap a secret without asking. "You are here," her mother said. "That is the only thing we will require of you, sweetheart." "I am here," Olivia echoed, and the words landed like a blanket on her shoulders. She breathed in the scent of bay leaves and baking and decided she would try her very best not to be a storm in this house. They made tea. They pretended together not to tiptoe around the space where a boyfriend's name would have gone. Her mother chatted about the holiday festival, how the committee had expanded, the cocoa stand, and convinced the high school choir to stage a carol flash mob in the square. They put out a desperate call for volunteers, her mother added, a little too casually. "I told them you would help if you felt up to it. You always did like bossing ribbon." "Bossing ribbon is my calling," Olivia said, smiling because it was easier than crying. She could spend the next week on the couch under a blanket, watching old movies that always arrived at the kiss on schedule. Or she could keep busy until the ache learned better manners. Busy felt like a bridge. The next morning, she wrapped herself in an old wool coat and set out for the community center where the festival committee was meeting. Snowflakes tumbled down in the lazy, theatrical way they do when they know they are being watched. It felt unexpectedly like walking inside a snow globe someone had shaken just for her. Inside the community center, the smell of coffee and construction paper met her at the door. Volunteers bustled around long tables, someone measuring tablecloths, someone else testing string lights. 2 teenagers making an impressive mess with glitter, snickering over a cardboard reindeer. At the head of the room stood Greta Turner, who had organized more bake sales and car washes than any 5 people combined, wielding a clipboard like a conductor's baton. "Look what the snow blew in," Greta called when she saw Olivia, an actual professional. "City people, no portfolios and Gantt charts. We need you." "I can wrangle cocoa and garlands," Olivia promised, grateful for the warmth that met her from all sides. She shed her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and joined the work. Lists steadied her. Laughter stitched over the thin places in her mood. She lost herself in tasks that had edges, counting cups, labeling donation jars, arranging pine boughs in old sap buckets that had belonged to the maple farm out on County Road. When her hands worked, her mind did not replay the moment her phone chimed, and everything she thought she knew about the next season of her life went quiet. She was carefully tying a velvet bow when the world shifted at the edges, like a photograph coming into sharper focus. A murmur moved through the room. Greta's gaze flicked toward the doorway, and in the slow, inevitable way of a tide, Olivia turned. He stood there with one hand on the doorframe, snow in his dark hair, a scarf looped around his neck in that unstudied way he had always had, as if he'd been born bundled against weather. The years had added steadiness to Matthew Cole, a gentleness at the corners of his mouth, but the old recognition bloomed in her with an ache that surprised her. Matthew, who had taught her to skip stones and had once carved their initials into the underside of the dock with a pocket knife, then left town without a goodbye. So many winters ago, it almost felt like a story, she had read and set back on the shelf. "Hey," he said simply, as if they'd last spoken yesterday instead of years ago. His voice had impossibly grown warmer. He held up a grocery bag, brimming with candy canes and marshmallows. "Greta said you needed reinforcements." "She always needs reinforcements," Greta said briskly, covering whatever quiet bloom had opened in the room. "Matthew Cole, you remember Olivia?" Olivia. This one wandered back from whatever far-flung place he has been and immediately got conscripted. That is how we love people in this town. Olivia found her voice where she had left it, tucked behind her heart. "Hi, Matt." "Hi, Liv," he answered, and the nickname loosened something behind her ribs. He shifted the bag from one hand to the other. "My dad needed me home for a while," he added, almost apologetically. I am here." The old questions rose in her, like birds startled into flight. Why he left without a word, why he had stayed away. But she let them settle again. The past could wait. The present asked for candy canes and logistics. "We have garlands that refuse to behave," she managed lightly. "Think you still remember how to tie a bow?" He looked at the ribbon in her hands, then up at her with a small, genuine smile that seemed to carry an apology she had once needed and now did not know how to receive. "I can learn," he said. "Show me." And there, at a long table, under fluorescent lights and a generous dusting of glitter, Olivia showed Matthew Cole how to make velvet into something obedient. His fingers, larger than she remembered, moved with care. Snow kept falling beyond the windows. In some other room, a choir practiced harmonies, and laughter spilled like bright ornaments. In this room, hearts that had learned hard lessons beat a little steadier, as if the season itself were willing to lend them an extra measure of grace. They worked until the sun slid behind the courthouse roof and the world turned that particular shade of December blue that always made Olivia want to go home and turn on every lamp. As she carried a box of lights to the door, Matthew stepped alongside her. "Let me," he said quietly, taking the other end. On the sidewalk, cold bit at their cheeks, the town tree rose above them, a dark, patient promise. Matthew shifted the box so he could open the door for her with his free hand. "Are you all right?" he asked, cautious, as if she were a finch perched on his palm. The truth surprised her by being simple. "Not really," she said, "but I am trying." He nodded, the way you nod when someone trusts you with a small piece of the truth. "Me too." Snow gathered on the brim of his hat. Olivia had the sudden, unreasonable urge to brush it away. Instead, she smiled, because humans are brave in small increments. "See you tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he said, as if he had rehearsed the word and wanted to get it exactly right. She walked home through a world made new by snow and the dangerous gentleness of memory. On the front porch, her mother had left a lantern lit. Inside, the kettle began to sing. For the first time since the text that had unstitched her winter, Olivia felt something like quiet settle in. Not the heavy quiet of sorrow, but the hush that comes right before the tree lights are plugged in and a room forgets its shadows. Maybe this holiday would not be what she had planned. Maybe it could be something else, something truer, softer, and exactly enough. Chapter 2. lights, cocoa, and old wounds. The next few days unfurled like ribbon. Each hour another length of color, the town used to wrap itself in warmth. Olivia woke early, pulled on her coat, and met the morning at the square, with a thermos in hand and a list in her pocket. She discovered that staying busy did not erase pain, but it gave pain a rhythm, and that was something. She and Matthew fell into a working rhythm so easily. It made her dizzy. He carried things without making a show of it. He listened with attention that felt like a coat held up in a doorway. When she delegated tasks, he disappeared and returned with the thing done and tidier than she had expected. He did not ask nosy questions. He did not avoid gentle ones. "You are always good at making chaos behave," he said once, untangling a string of lights the size of a small river. "I remember the year the choir's music went missing, and you made them sing by heart." "I bribed them with cookies," she confessed, "and told them their faces were the important part." "Their faces were the important part," he said, smiling sideways. Greta, who missed nothing that could be turned into progress, assigned them together more often than chance would allow. "Two people who can keep a schedule and a secret," she muttered approvingly, pushing a clipboard into Olivia's hands. "You will handle the cocoa stand and the tree lighting queue. Liv, you mind the timings. Matthew, you keep the generator from throwing a tantrum." The cocoa stand turned out to be a small kingdom ruled by whipped cream and compromise. Olivia discovered anew that every person has a very personal idea of how much marshmallow constitutes enough. She worked with cheerful efficiency, calling out orders, smiling at old teachers, and the boy who had once walked her home from the homecoming dance. Everyone bundled past recognition in hats and scarves. Children pressed their mittened hands to the counter, eager for extra sprinkles. Their parents chatted about weather and the new librarian, and whether this year's Santa had the right beard. Matthew, back behind the stand by the heater, kept the kettles full and the generator content, with a knack that suggested he could negotiate with machines better than with people. Olivia liked the way he moved in a small space, careful not to bump her, as if he were always choosing to be gentle. When she brushed past him to reach the cinnamon, he stepped aside, without making it a moment, and yet somehow it was a moment anyway. Small, warm, unannounced. At dusk on the day before the tree lighting, they stayed late to test the light curtain. The square emptied, the temperature dropped, and the world went blue again in that particular beloved way. Olivia plugged in one strand. Matthew checked connections. The first row of bulbs woke in a slow yawn of gold. Then a second row, then a third, until half the tree glimmered, and the other half sulked in darkness. Olivia sighed. "Every year," she said. "Half a miracle." Matthew crouched at the base of the tree, his breath making small puffs in the cold. "We are missing a stubborn connector," he said, peering into the tangle. "Or this string is being dramatic. Could be both," she said, kneeling beside him. Cold seeped through the knees of her jeans. She did not mind. He handed her a flashlight and lifted a branch. "See?" She did. A small plastic plug that had given up on ambition. She clicked it into its companion until it made that little satisfying sound. "There," she said, and the tree answered by admitting 100 more points of light. They sat back on their heels and watched the glow build. It spread as the sky darkened, the square brightening like a breath taken in. Olivia felt her throat tighten, not with sorrow, but with something tenderer. She had always loved this moment most, the part right before everything officially begins. "Liv," Matthew said quietly, and she realized they had been sitting shoulder to shoulder for a long time, warm in that particular way that happens when two people do not yet know if they are allowed to shiver together. He tipped his head toward the tree. "I am sorry." "For what?" Her voice came out softer than she intended. "For leaving the way I did," he said. "For letting the part of me that was afraid make the decision for the part that knew better. I was 17 and thought a silent exit meant no one could say, 'Do not go.' It was cowardly. I have carried it around like an unreturned library book." Olivia let out a breath that turned to pearl in the cold. For years, she had rehearsed clever speeches she would deliver if she ever saw him again. The lines about loyalty and endings, the question of whether she had ever meant enough to merit a goodbye. But now, under the half-lit tree and the wholly lit sky, none of those speeches felt useful. What mattered was the man beside her, steady and careful with his hands, choosing to look at the mess of wire and history and untangle what he could. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "It hurt then. It does not hurt the same way now. Life happened. I hurt other ways." She smiled wryly, thinking of the text message that had ended the future she had been so sure of. "I suppose I am learning that sometimes people leave clumsily because they have not learned how to stay." He made a soft sound that might have been agreement or sorrow. "I would like, if you would let me, to be better at staying." She turned the flashlight off to let the tree claim the night. "Maybe we could both practice," she said, and the word we did not frighten her. They finished the test and locked the generator. They walked down Main Street to where Olivia's mother had left a to-go container of stew on the porch because mothers believe in feeding people who come home late from saving Christmas. Olivia invited Matthew to sit on the steps and eat, and he accepted with the grateful appetite of someone who has been living on coffee and good intentions. They ate in companionable quiet. Snow dusted their coats. Somewhere a single bell rang, perhaps the bell over the bakery door, perhaps something older and more benevolent. Before he left, Matthew pulled his scarf tighter and cleared his throat. "My dad has good days and not as good days," he said. "On the not as good ones, I walk. If you ever want company, even just to the end of the block and back." She thought of his father, the kind, expansive man who had grilled impossible quantities of hot dogs at 4th of July picnics and taught half the town to parallel park without yelling. "I would," she said, "want company." "Tomorrow then," he said. After the lighting. "Tomorrow," she echoed, and found that the word tasted like cinnamon. That night, sleep finally came with its hands full, not with forgetting, but with rest that was deep enough to make the morning possible. Chapter 3. Snowlight with Confessions. The town turned out for the tree lighting, the way they always did, with wool hats and pink noses, and the kind of glee that sews people together in winter. The choir lined the courthouse steps. There, scarves a tidy row of bright. And when the conductor lifted her hands, the first chord rose into the icy air, like breath made visible. Olivia stood, stage left with Greta and a timeline, counting quietly, giving the smallest nods to the kid assigned to the giant novelty switch someone's uncle had made. In his wood shop, Matthew moved between the generator and the cocoa stand, a piece of quiet muscle keeping the whole thing from vibrating apart. He glanced at Olivia from time to time and gave her the smallest of thumbs up, and it worked on her like an extra layer, a kindness between her and the wind. When the moment came, the choir hit the last ringing note, the switch flipped with satisfying drama, and the spruce burst into full gold life. There was a collective intake of breath and then applause that felt like a roof against the sky. Children squealed. Old friends squeezed each other's hands. For an instant, even the teenagers stopped pretending to be unmoved. Olivia looked up and felt the familiar sting behind her eyes. It wasn't sorrow. It was the human ache of wanting to keep a light on forever. She glanced over and found Matthew already watching the crowd instead of the bulbs, as if he knew the real show had always been the faces. After the cocoa rush, after the choir flash, mob surprised the square with a carol that unfurled in rising joy. After Greta decreed the night an unequivocal success, Matthew found Olivia near the base of the tree, where she'd crouched to wrap a stubborn cord with gaffer's tape, because some habits never left you. Walk? He asked. They set out across the square and down Maple Street, past houses with candles in their windows and porches draped in greenery. Snow sifted down like slow applause. The river hummed under its frosting of ice. Olivia tucked her hands into her pockets and breathed in, breathed out. "My dad had a good day," Matthew said after a while, voice quiet. He made a joke about his doctor and laughed at himself, laughing. He exhaled. It felt like a present I did not know I wanted. "I am glad," she said. They paused on the bridge, where the iron railings had collected white cuffs. The water below moved like a secret being kind. Matthew rested his palms on the cold metal and looked out toward the dark stand of pine on the far bank. "Liv," he said, and the nickname rolled out of him without effort. "There is another thing I need to tell you. It is not for your sympathy. It is just a fact of my life I have not said aloud enough." She waited. "When I left," he went on very carefully, "I told myself I was leaving for college and adventure and all the reasons people leave. But the truth is simpler and uglier. My dad had been sick once before. He got better. We thought it was done. I panicked when the future looked like a mirror of the past. I thought if I stayed, I would become this tight, scared version of myself. I was not brave enough to imagine staying and becoming something else." He swallowed. "I hurt you because I was afraid of myself." Olivia listened to the water, to the small crackle of snow under their boots, to the silence that had been between them for years and now moved, slid, found another shape. "I was going to leave," she said, "even before you did. I had an acceptance letter in my dresser and a suitcase under my bed. I told myself I would tell you on the last night of summer, because goodbyes belong to soft darks and not daylight. she smiled at the river. I almost chickened out. I wanted to ask you to come with me. I wanted you to tell me to stay. I wanted both. I got neither. And then you were gone first, and I decided that was easier because I could be mad at you instead of myself. He huffed out a small laugh that fogged and disappeared. We were such children. We are still practicing, she said. But we have better tools. They walked on, neither of them needing to fill the whole air with words. At Olivia's front walk, Matthew stopped and looked directly at her, like a person memorizing a map that matters. I do not know what comes next, he said. I am here as long as my father needs me. Perhaps longer. I am figuring out if this town can be a place I choose as a man, not a boy. I only know that when I see you in this light. He glanced up at the street lamp, at the snow softening the edges of everything. It feels like something that healed enough to be trusted again. Olivia's throat tightened, but not from pain. I am not exactly whole, she said, but I am not broken in the way I feared I would be. I think I am a person who can love again, slowly, kindly. He smiled then, not triumphantly, but like someone who had found the right house after a long walk. We can be slow, he said. Slow sounds perfect, she answered, and they stood there for a long minute in the benevolent cold, letting the night bless their honesty. He did not kiss her, and she did not lean forward and ask him to. The restraint did not hurt. It felt oddly like faith. When he left, she watched him go until he reached the corner and tipped his hat toward the sky, like a small salute to something larger. Inside, her mother had left 2 mugs on the counter and a plate of ginger cookies. They sat at the kitchen table, shared the sweets, and Olivia told her mother exactly as much as she could hold. Her mother listened with the patience of someone who had learned to trust time. Love is a winter plant, her mother said at last, thoughtful. It knows how to grow in the cold. It just asks you to notice the small green when it appears. Thank you for listening to Holiday Heartbreak here on Moonlit Romantic. In Maple Ridge, Olivia found that even in seasons marked by loss, light still returns. With Matthew beside her and the town's tree glowing bright, she discovered that love has a way of growing quietly, like winter plants, steady and resilient, even in the cold. If this story brought you comfort, please consider subscribing to Moonlit Romantic for more soothing bedtime romances. Until next time, may your nights be peaceful, your dreams tender, and your heart open to love in all its seasons. Good night.